Symbolic history through sight and sound. 4. The Alexandrian melt. From the wind-blown transport of the 190 BC victory of Samothrace, a flight as of the cloud chorus in Aristophanes' bitterest comedy. Eternal clouds, let us appear. Let us arise from the roaring depths of ocean, our Father. Let us fly toward the lofty mountains, spread our damp wings over their forest-laden summits, whence we will dominate the distant valleys, the harvest fed by the sacred earth, the murmur of the divine streams, and the resounding waves of the sea, which the unwearying orb lights up with its glittering beams. To be versed by Oscar Wilde, cloud maidens that float on forever dew-sprinkled, and resung by Shelley, I am the daughter of earth and water and the nursling of the sky. The carved rapture no doubt paralleled in Greek music as well, before it had weathered to neumes on Delphic stone. From that, to the Coptic flattening of anchorites in the Egyptian desert, as if Plotinus cut away everything, and we rub the eye, and it sees the light it contains, truest seeing, had joined the cry of synagogue chant. The break to such earth denial, from such earth claim, is as startling as any in history, and yet the West, in less than a century, has turned in music from Franck's romantic wingings, les Éolides. To the encaustic reduction of Varese. Could the very Sphinx, who smiles from the archaic Acropolis the Persians would sack, have answered how far that transformation was latent in Dionysiac and Socratic Greece, how far an outcome of Alexander's fusing East and West, those earth-despising sages, Calanus and others, he sought beyond the Indus, Hebrew scriptures seeded from Eleusis, reaching from Egyptian bondage and Ikhnaton's one-god zeal, toward Hölderlin's second Dionysus, sacrificial Syrian of bread and wine. Could the Sphinx herself have told, or was it her wisdom only to propose the question? Since where in history has such an antinomy been proposed, without requiring for its answer both in one? Face two ways, toward the sheer Acropolis of Lindos on Rhodes, the island Pindar praised in a golden ode, where in Hellenistic times the victory of Samothrace was carved, the columns of the 4th century BC, though the rock had been a sanctuary of Lindian Athena, from its seizure by the Dorians, descended, as Pindar says, of old from the widely ruling race of Heracles. But if we turn, the temple now to the right, asserting columned Greece, it was into the harbor below that Paul sailed on his way to Jerusalem. His great encounters, Euroclydon and the shipwreck, when the viper warmed by fire fastened on his hand and he felt no harm, occurred in Crete and Malta on the final voyage to Rome, Yet here, by the ruined temple over his storied harbour, the second letter to the Corinthians sounds that overthrow, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Take a stand nearer the centre of that world polis where Alexander thought to embrace in Macedonian vigour and Athenian enlightenment everything Persia had ruled, from age-old Egypt to hither India. A stand, say, on the island of Cyprus, and from there, as in a partial derivative, scan the time manifold. First, this 6th millennium grey volcanic idol, what cropped out with tribal agriculture from the whole family of man. How varied the time scale of history! Almost 3,000 years were required for the transition to the symbolic sophistication and polish of this soapstone-seated idol on the threshold of the Bronze Age, contemporary with early Sumer and Egypt, and suggestively with Cycladic pre-Greece. By the 13th century BC, the Cycladic had focused to the Minoan. The Minoan, spreading over the Aegean islands, had sowed Greece with the Homeric citadels of the Mycenaean, then embroiled in the Trojan War. Even in Cyprus, this faience rhyton testifies to that culture, though the island was also in contact with mainland Syria, and was ruled from New Kingdom Egypt, then at its Ramesses II peak of imperial power and style. By the next century, this horned deity of bronze hints at the hardening of a time of troubles, the folk wanderings which brought in the Iron Age, and with Mycenaean decline, the dominance of Asia. Yet the first Greek is nascent here, and who is this with head or helmet horned? Dionysus, born by the myth in Boeotian Thebes to Cadmus' daughter Semele, is also called Horned Bromius, god of earthquake and violence. But Cadmus was a Phoenician, bringer of the alphabet. Dionysus, too, in Euripides, has returned to Thebes, a new god, from triumphs in Asia, while his origin, for Herodotus, is that older Thebes of Egypt. He is Osiris, its lord of rebirth from the grave. The cradle of Greece already resembles the Alexandrian melt, though in Yeats' double cone, under a change of sign. The folk wandering brought in the Greeks, the Cyprian hero Cinyras, from the time of the Trojan War. By the beginning of the 5th century, this laurelled head carries the archaic smile over into what has suddenly become the Olympian pride of all Greece. Against it, the 4th century of Macedonian rule and academic philosophy witnesses in Cyprus as elsewhere a soft ripening of art and soul. In Aristophanes' Frogs, the ghost of Aeschylus blames Euripides, as if those choruses of pain and escape, the chromatic fragment from Orestes. Or what Gilbert Murray gleaned as from the Bacchae. Where is the home for me? O Cyprus set in the sea, Aphrodite's home in the soft sea foam. Would I could wend to thee, where the wings of the loves are furled, and faint the heart of the world had seduced all of the Hellenic name. A classical continuance of over 6 centuries, though the power centre has shifted to Rome. How heavy now, in this 3rd century A.D. mosaic pavement from a Cyprian villa, the mystery of Dionysus has become. As Yeats writes, in pity for man's darkening thought, he walked that room and issued thence in Galilean turbulence. No wonder if in the same century, or the early 4th, though our example is from Tarragon across the Mediterranean, mosaics would shift from villa leopards of the wine god to mausoleum lions of Daniel's Bible victory. If we range now, expanding the cut explored in Cyprus, what lies at the base from China and India to Europe is the Neolithic idol, 6th millennium BC, from the iron gates of the Danube, whence the Indo-Europeans would flood the south, this so-called fish-mouth man, weightiest of all. Beside it, at the same time, but from Greece, the Peloponnese, a female form is a miracle of grace, as if dawn clarity was already welling from what would become classic soil. Without the implied world community, and kindling within it an Aegean light, there could have been no Alexandrian dream, much less the astonishing fact. 3 pots will display at a glance both the widespread common ground and the lyrical birth of the Proto-Greek. Here, end of the 4th millennium, from Mesopotamia, a vase with stylized natural forms, at the top cranes, then Saluki hounds, below the ibex, huge horned. Chinese, 3rd millennium, the abstract spiral of sea and growth, already hinting in this infolding at yin-yang. From Crete, early 2nd millennium, this Minoan refinement and delight, sprung from the world base, like Aphrodite, ocean-born. But 1,000 years before Minos' palace, with the beginning of Aegean traffic in the bronze of the New Age, and in complementarity with the stupendous rise of Old Kingdom Egypt, here King Zoser, 3rd dynasty, time also of that idol from Cyprus, the seated figure we saw in the shape of a cross. Cycladic carvings in crystalline marble, this luminous harp player in the Athens Museum, refined something so free and fresh, so Apollonian, we almost hear the bard singing of Ilium, or Alcaeus and Sappho hymning wine and love, deathless Aphrodite throned in flowers, daughter of Zeus, a guileful enchantress, fight by my shoulder. Yet, as always, cross-fertilization was required. The Hellenic could not have arisen from the Cycladic alone. As Herodotus would discover, Egypt was for the Greeks the deepest source of gods and art, of civilization. 5th dynasty tomb reliefs from 2500 BC already pursue the joyful representation of natural forms. This painted relief of cattle fording a stream from Saqqara, where the zigzag overlay at the base marvelously suggests the flow of water. Though the leap from that to the Hellenistic animal affects, as in the Alexandrian mathematics and science which culminated in Archimedes, a hyperbolic approach toward modernity. What startles in this Attic horse dredged from the sea is not simply the mastery of life-sized, free-standing bronze, but that 2 centuries before Christ we sense the restless search and psychic liability of the later West, the calculus tug of Eudoxus' method of exhaustion. Meanwhile, from the start, the whole civilized theatre was preparing by a multiple first thrust for the empires Alexander would assume. There the Greek would not be the only rebel scion of Egypt. How many of the prohibitions and purifications Herodotus noted in Thebes surface also in Leviticus? And where are we headed? As early as the pyramids, in the art of Mesopotamia, this inlaid standard of that the 2 faces are paired, this a scene of battle, the other a victory feast, might point to the Vaphio cups, Cretan or Mycenaean, opposed reliefs of bulls wild and tame, or the discovered Theron fresco of an expedition where some see a contrast of peace and war. In Homer there is the shield of Achilles, with its alternate cities of law and marriage, of siege and death, or, in the classically inspired West, Michelangelo's Medici tombs, with the L'Allegro and Il Penseroso of Milton. But what the Standard of Ur brings to mind is not that Greek tradition, but the faith chronicles of the chosen people. Their songs of war and victory, as Miriam's, "Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea." Yet the oldest biblical texts, like this Ugarit hymn, hopefully reconstructed from cuneiform, are dated 1,000 years after that Ur of the Chaldees, from which Abraham, father of Israel, is said to have migrated. The creation in Genesis stands in some relation to that of the Babylonian fragments, with its first stirring on the waters, its confusion and conflict of gods, revolt of darkness, viper, and dragon. The biblical flood, with Noah's Ark, owes more to the account preserved in the British Museum tablets from 3000 or so BC. But what the Hebrew successors of old Sumer have effected after Egyptian exile in scriptures actually contemporary from Achaean epoi down with Greece is the transformation of a capricious polytheism to the post-Ikhnaton unity, moral justice, ultimately the mercy of Yahweh. So the ram caught in a flowering thicket of gilded wood and polychrome, also from Ur about 2500 BC, might be waiting, vicarious averter of the sacrifice of Isaac, when God tempted Abraham. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. That ancestor civilization of the 3rd millennium had also its Indus Valley cognate. At the limit of the vast area Alexander would march over, and his Seleucid successors would Hellenize. And here too the cult affinities, as in this priest-god-king from Mohenjo-Daro, are with what later in the god-seeking Semitic East would both absorb and be polarized against the philosophy and art of the Greeks. Disheartening that for all that pre-Hellenic fabric, stretching from Egypt and the Aegean, around the Fertile Crescent to Persia, Bactria, India, and over the 1,000 years from these beginnings, through the tomb paintings of New Kingdom Thebes, we have only one cult song from Canaanite Ugarit on the coast of Syria, time of Ikhnaton, a conjectural harmony for voice and lyre. What different music these houris of the Nile would have sounded! Amid such luxuries, the Israelites were slaves. We think of the Oriental love poems associated in the Bible with the amorous yoke of Solomon, ships of Tarshish bringing gold and silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. A bundle of myrrh is my well-beloved unto me. He shall lie all night betwixt my breasts. Yet Solomon lived 500 years after the scribe of this 18th dynasty tomb. And the canticles named for him are commonly assigned to the 3rd century BC, when the theocratic pocket of old Judah was invaded from all sides by the Hellenism of Alexandria, the new sensuality of carving and fresco, of which a final luminous flourish would be preserved in Pompeii. What Greek bloom has touched the interpreted God-love of the Song of Songs? Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue. Thy 2 breasts are like 2 young roes that are twins, which feed among the lilies. Until day break and the shadows flee away, I will get me to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. Meanwhile, the culture which would conquer Israel and be conquered by it from within had come to its first Aegean birth, a keenness to which the second and Homeric would return. The frescoes of maritime Thera, buried under volcanic ash about 1500 BC, the bullfights and natural forms of Crete from the time of New Kingdom Egypt, open encyclical history of soul, the glad possibility of a late-period cultivation of sensuous yet airy delight, like impressionist verve in a Europe of symbolist pain. That whole horizon of pre-Hellenic pleasure, with the luxury of musical houris, in her Nile temple the Ammon begetting of Queen Hatshepsut, Ahmes awoke at the perfume of the god, and laughed in the face of his majesty. Whatever Herodotus tallies in the Greek debt to Egypt, pales under the one god stare of Ikhnaton, about 2 centuries before the Trojan War. What that enforces is the other debt of Hebrew prophecy. Amos, by 750, seek him that maketh the 7 stars and Orion, and turneth the shadow of death into the morning. The Lord is his name. Isaiah was not much later, though the writing continued over centuries, preparing for a Saviour child. Behold, a virgin shall conceive. Unto us a son is given, a man of sorrows, wounded for our transgressions. But the New Kingdom extravagancies of soul and flesh rested on imperial war, and here too Ramesses II, smiting his enemies in the rock temple of Abu Simbel, is more tied to the oldest wars of the Lord stratum of the Bible, the Ark Song of Moses, Rise up, Lord, and let thine enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee before thee. Deborah's song in Judges, At her feet he bowed, he fell, he lay down, at her feet he bowed, he fell, where he bowed, there he fell down dead. Than to anything, though of the same period, in the epic myths of the Greeks. Since ancient times, the forest of carved columns in the great hall of Karnak, near Thebes, has been called one of the wonders of the world. It was built over dynasties, but centrally during and to commemorate Ramesses II's wars with the Hittites, who were fanning out from the highlands of Turkey. Yet this pillared hall marks the crisis of Egyptian conquest and temple construction. The eternal treaty of 1280 here inscribed set Egypt on the long decline before Assyria. What else would have permitted the exodus of the Jews or their settlement in the Promised Land? For the Hittites, too, it was the turning point toward the 1200 BC overthrow. Though even at their prime, this 14th century Lion Gate in the 4-mile wall of Hattushash, they exhibit, after the civilizing old kingdoms, the primitive force of imperial legatees, fortified against troubles to ensue. The 1500 BC explosion had wrecked Santorin. The accompanying quake and tidal wave must have shaken naval Crete. Mainland Mycenae, with its own Lion Gate and Cyclopean ramparts, or this crater of marching warriors, also suggests the heavier fate of the successor power, a power soon to spend itself in the Trojan Wars and homecoming disasters which would feed tragic myth. From these rode Myrmidons of 1200 BC. To these of Asia Minor 4 centuries later, the power collapse and folk wanderings invite a range of ephemeral shifting kingdoms. Between the Hittite and Egyptian retreat and the more savage reversion of Assyrian rise about 900, Phoenicians and Philistines, Ammonites and Moabites strove. Even Israel established the archetypal kingdom of David, with Solomon's palace and temple, as if to imitate on their own the monuments they had slaved to build under Ramesses II, while to the north Ionians, Lydians, Phrygians jockeyed with more barbaric Scythians in the shiftings Herodotus resumes. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold. I slaughtered them, said Ashur-nazir-pal, 9th century. With their blood I dyed the mountains red like wool. Their young men and their maidens I burned in the fire. And, as in this 7th century Assyrian relief, I carried off their spoil and their possessions. The heads of their warriors I cut off, and I formed them into a pillar over against their city. In 854 BC, his son, Shalmaneser III, smote the Arameans of Damascus and of Hamath, allied with Ahab of Israel, who took the field, Assyrian record says, with 2,000 chariots and 10,000 men. The already divided Jewish kingdoms of north and south were bled, subdued, dismembered. When Sennacherib assaulted Judah about 700 BC, time of this relief of Elamites led into slavery, he boasted of taking 200,000 prisoners. Though the great symbolic bondage for the Jews, that punishment of which Isaiah warns, did not stem from Assyria, but from the brief Chaldean empire of Neo-Babylon, its great city called the most glorious of the ancient world. By the rivers of Babylon there we sat down, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. Then the Persians captured Babylon, 539 BC, and Cyrus freed the Jews and restored the temple of Jerusalem. Yahweh's anointed, Isaiah calls him. While Herodotus from the other side heard Greek tidings that Cyrus had been exposed as a child, like Oedipus, for an oracle, and that Hipparchus, his champion, had been fed his own children, like Thyestes. Here, in the ruins Alexander would make of Persepolis, Darius I, who also favored the Hebrews and attacked the Greeks, fights a lion monster as Gilgamesh, Asian Hercules and harrower of hell, cover for the horse trickery that bungled to Marathon. The Persians, in passing, had subdued Thrace and Macedon, but north and west lay the Indo-European pool of past and future invasions, this Celtic cult wagon of the 7th century BC, a bronze death goddess and her retinue. Had not Indics, Hittites, Persians, Lydians, Lycians, Phrygians, Greeks, Umbrians, Latins poured down from that death and life source? But between that Austria and its Aegean radiant, the day spring had occurred, which the island of Delos would commemorate, as in this 7th century BC terrace of lions, facing the sacred lake and the palm tree, where the golden-haired Apollo with Artemis was born, as in the Homeric hymn, Blessed Leto, rejoice, for you bore glorious children, Apollo who shoots from afar, and Artemis who loves arrows, even in rocky Delos, under the Cynthian hill, near to a palm tree that stood beside the waters of Inopus. In the Iliad, no calm Apollonian, Latimore, Lord of the silver bow, who set your power about Chryse and Killer the sacrosanct, who are Lord in strength over Tenedos, terrible was the clash that rose from the bow of silver. As charged as the later child of the Thunderer, this 6th century bowl of Exekias with the Homeric hymn, I bring to mind Dionysus, son of burning Semele, on a jutting headland by the shore of the fruitless sea, a stripling with dark eyes, long hair, and purple robe. Tersinian pirates seized him, hurried to their doom. Wind filled the sail. The crew hauled tight on either side. Strange sights came upon them. Sweet and fragrant wine filled the ship's black hull. Ivy twined the mast. A vine with clustered grapes spread out along the yard. The god from the bow scowled and roared as a lion. The sailors leapt as one into the foam-bright sea, changed to dolphins. As Ovid, 6 centuries later, details, all back-arched and body-blackened, flippered hands